I am Jacob Hammons. I work for SaltStack. I'm a fairly new hire to SaltStack, and I have been brought in to work solely on documentation. Underneath me is Seth House. Many of you guys probably know Seth House. Seth House is a software engineer, ninja. He does a lot of different things, and he has put a lot of kind of work into the tooling systems, and so I've been leaning on him heavily, and we'll probably continue to do to kind of get a lay of the land of kind of what needs to be done for doc, what the needs are. So welcome again. I really can't say how, just the fact that people would come to this session just makes me feel so good and, want to come and see. And the nature of the contributions here is fantastic, and I'm really excited to get into open source. So those of you who were at Tom's morning session heard him talk about how SaltStack is always looking for a challenge, like we're always up for the challenge. So in light of what Tom has said, I would just like to introduce the challenge accepted cat. I've walked around SaltConf this week, and I'll tell people that I work on documentation, and they look at me, and I think I've got my work cut out for me. So in light of what Tom has said, we're gonna go for the challenge. But realistically, I've spent some time with Salt, and the reason why I feel comfortable putting the animated cat GIF up is Salt really is easy. As I talk to the different engineers just about Salt, one of the things that I hear constantly is it's really easy and it seems complicated. You go out to the dock and there's a lot of different steps and there's a lot of different things here, but it's, it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to set up. You don't need a database. You don't need, complicated network infrastructure, DNS, whatever that is. You don't need it. So that's kind of why I'm excited to be here and feel confident that, we can improve here, is because I think this Salt is pretty easy. So what we're going to talk about. So first of all, I want to touch on a few things that I think are being done well. I've worked for several software companies over my career doing always documentation, and Salt has some things that are done fantastic, much better. I've worked for 10,000 plus corporations, and the Salt community does some things much better than those companies that have dedicated resources, that have the process through the reference docs, and we'll touch on that a little more. And then I want to talk about just kind of the things that I think we need to focus on, where Salt needs to make an investment, some things that we need to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the enterprise GUI. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that's kind of a place where I think that help can simplify your lives as you try to scale what you do. And then I want to spend a lot of the time just going to the whiteboard and getting your feedback. I hope that's kind of why you guys all came, is you've used the doc, you've contributed to the doc, you have something to say about it. I want to hear it. I mean, let's just get out here and let's just be honest with each other. Let's figure out where the problems are, where we need to put our attention. SaltStack is committed to improving the documentation. The fact that I'm the first guy with documentation in the title, I think, speaks to that. So let's just, I'm ready to hit the ground running on Monday. And then, everybody else is doing live code. So if we get time, we'll live code some documentation. Probably not. But it's there if you guys want to do it. We can text pad or whatever. Okay, so I touched on this a little bit. What's being done well? So as I came in, I'm very impressed with the amount of reference. Some of the checks that Seth has pointed out to me. When you create a new module function, the lint checker makes sure that there's some sort of documentation there. I think it requires an example. And so going through reference code and seeing an example for every call, that is rare. I don't know off the top of my head. You guys might have come across something, but I've looked at a lot of API documentation. I've written a lot of API documentation, and I've never managed a set of documentation that had a snippet for every reference. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to feedback, because I've heard some things that it's like, well, the snippet's good. I kind of want to see it in the full sample, but we can touch on some of that. The community around Salt, I think, is just fantastic. As I started to learn Salt, I opened up Google and I spent a full day just Googling Salt, SaltStack getting started. I YouTubed I watch videos, read blogs, and it's a passionate community. There's a lot of people willing to share knowledge. There's a whole bunch of great blog posts that kind of give you a little overview of Salt, to kind of take you through the first steps, and that's something that we want to build on and formalize as a company, because we know that there's a great need around that, and we'll talk a little more there. And there's a lot of YouTube videos. Like I found some non-Salt employees going to conferences talking about Salt, and it's like that's fantastic. That's really neat to see that a community member who doesn't, who just contributes would go to a conference and take an hour and the time to prepare to talk about Salt. So that's it. So the natural next step is what are the challenges? So I've kept this list purposefully small. There's certainly more challenges than 2 around it. But when you think about user interaction, when you have a question, when you're stuck on something, you use some process to get yourself to some content that you think will solve your question. And so when I think about content, I like to split it into accessibility issues and content issues. And that's something maybe during the feedback you guys can help me understand is how much do we need to improve accessibility versus how much do we need to improve content. Anytime I talk about this, though, I make sure that these 2 numbers are part of the conversation, because I've found that you really, if you're spending all of your time designing some really fancy website that does all of this stuff and this database on the back, just all this complexity, and you don't focus on creating great content, you're wasting your time. So accessibility, while it's one of the 2, for me, it's really, let's just fix it enough to get stuff accessible, and then content to me, the saying content is king, I live by that. I think that having compelling content is what, that's where all the value is. And web interfaces come and go, and there's different ways to present information, but at the core of it, the content is what's important. So let's talk a little bit about accessibility. This is just a little screen cap from our analytics tool. I've been spending some time in there kind of looking at what pages are getting hit, percentage of new users, so just some different things. So what this is showing, and this is filtered by visits to the EN latest on the help site. What this is showing is that about 76% of our sessions start from a Google search. So, you come in, you type some very specific question usually into Google, you get taken to a page on the SaltStack doc site. And it's usually, I think 3 pages per visit is the average right now. So it's usually 1 to 3 pages that you're looking at, and the top hits are kind of in the reference. And that kind of aligns with what I've experienced with the documentation. The reference is good, and or you can figure it out, I guess, and that's kind of how it's being used. So, but overwhelmingly, organic search is what's driving. So when we talk about accessibility, that's going to be what we talk about. Is like, okay, people are searching Google. How do we improve that experience as people come in? And here's a couple. Many of you might be aware of some of these issues. This is where I've leaned on Seth and others at SaltStack heavily. Is there's some low-hanging fruit around documentation and content, and there's some issues that have been open for a little while that we can now prioritize and get fixed. So in the near term, one of the first things we want to do is just get everything on a one URL. Right now, I think some of our versions are spread across Read the Docs and docs.saltstack.com, and there's some different versions in different places. SaltStack has got a CDN that's hosting saltstack.com. There's space over there. We just want to get everything put on one URL. It's going to be docs.saltstack.com. Easy. We'll Google index it, and that's where everything's going to live. The next thing is we want to just make multiple versions of the doc accessible, and that's really just a matter of prioritizing, sitting down, building the versions that people are using, and putting them up on a website. It's really, as I say, low-hanging fruit, and that's something that we can focus on very early. Now here I put improve organization. This is, to me, this is more of just, it's not so much improve organization. I don't even really like the word improve. It's more of just make some general segmentation around the documentation to make it a little easier to consume. And for me, that's a pretty typical pattern is your reference documentation is very clearly labeled and marked as reference. Like when you're looking at a function reference, and then when you're looking at kind of conceptual workflow user-based docs, and then you have a separate area built for getting started. I'm a big kind of believer in putting your getting started information not in the middle of all of your other content, because you know what that person wants to do. They have a very clear pathway. When you get into reference, it can be a little difficult to kind of predict what someone wants to look at. But if someone comes to the site and clicks on a Get Started link, it's like, hey, I know exactly what you want to do. This is great. I can provide an interface for you to do that. So what I would like to do is jump over and show you just some of the changes that we've been working on internally around some new UI design. And this isn't something that we're going to just dump immediately. We're exploring some ideas. We've got some new ways that we think would be useful to present. Before I show this, I want to talk about there's in user experience design. There's something called I'm going to have to go to my notes for this one. It's the Okay, this is what it is, because I have to have the wording right on this one. It's the principle of least astonishment. Many of you probably heard this, and the phrasing is why I have to go straight for the word, because it really kind of sums up. Delivering help is not a complicated thing. People have very clear expectations of what help should look like, how it should be delivered. We aren't looking to break any of that. We're just, we're looking to do a few enhancements on that. So let me jump over here and show you. So this is just a pretty simple functional skin of what we've been developing internally at SaltStack to present help. It's not a huge shift from the previous version. The previous version shows the content. It works fairly well as far as I can tell. Just a couple of things though that I want to point out. We want to make sure that version selection is an integral part of the help system. Especially when you look at our traffic coming in from Google, we want those to resolve to the latest stable version. And then if you're on an older version, we want to make it very clear what version you're on and make it very easy to jump back a version or two. So if you want to jump to develop, or jump to an older version. And I think we'll probably default to the latest stable version. I'd like to hear feedback on that. I guess that's kind of what people are running. Let me see if there's anything else I gotta make sure we cover. Just a couple things that I think might help usability. Here we just have some general links to the main content sections, and one of the things that I'd like to add to the existing docs is a full table of contents on every page. As you guys know, once you kind of drill into the TOC a little bit, you can get down a little ways, and so I think without a lot of disruption, we can present a bigger TOC. And then just some of these things, as you scroll down the page, it gives you the in-context link, a next button to just kind of keep the flow. TOCs here, dynamic. Not a huge shift. We aren't looking for a huge shift. People kind of, you have expectations. Help systems work. So this is just kind of some of the things that we'd like to drive. SaltStack, we're trying to keep it simple. We're trying to keep it clean. So that is that, I guess. Let me jump back here. I swiped and lost my spot. All right, so this is kind of, it's the second half of it. Content, and I don't know if you can read the blue text there, and this is one of my favorite sayings as a content developer is, no information is better than misinformation. And so, as I go into companies, a lot of times, you start thinking like, okay, well, let's get this into the doc, let's get this into the doc, let's get this into the doc. But there's not a clear maintenance structure for the content. And, so I think what is important is anytime you kind of put content into your help system, you need a plan to kind of keep it updated. Make sure that it's not going to be out there informing people of, just of like old information. And in a project like Salt, it's extremely important because of just the pace of development. I'm still having a hard time just getting the whole pace down, like just how quickly and rapidly features just show up in the Salt code base. So that's something that I've definitely, I'm going to be adjusting to. So then I've just touched on a couple notes. So like really here, content, we don't need to spend a lot of time here. I'd like to spend more time on content when we open for discussion. There's issues in the backlog. I'm going to start, looking down through those. We'll triage those, we'll prioritize, and we'll start working on them. So we know that there's content that needs to be added. I had a conversation with Tom yesterday, and he was saying, hey, engines, beacons, nobody knows what these are. We got to tell them. And so Tom's like, let's sit down, let's make some videos. Let's make some short 5-minute videos. Let's get some of this stuff. So there's a lot of excitement within SaltStack to help generate this content. And so we're kind of in a position now where we have some people who can focus on the delivery of that and just kind of make sure that it gets, put up in front of people, gets maintained, that sort of thing. I listed more samples here. This is just some feedback I've heard this week during the session. And this is, to me, I think that there's a gap, at least there was for me as I learned Salt. There's a gap between the code snippets and the formulas. Like, I accidentally went to the formulas page once and it was just like, whoa, what is this doing? And then, you go into the code snippet and you have and so as I kind of got introduced to some simple top files, some simple state files, and then they kind of grew and I'm like, okay, here's a requisite. It started to make sense and the relationship started to build. I think we can do a better job of providing some simple samples, and I think there's plenty of them floating around. One of the recommendations from someone was to just set up a GitHub where people can contribute. This is just a state file that does something. This isn't a blessed formula. This isn't like, this is just a state file that I used. It worked for me. It may or may not work for you. Just kind of go look and see what I did. I'm using a require in. You might not want to use that. You might want to use something different. I'm kicking this off with a command. You might want to put it into a state. But it's just, I think that there's an opportunity to allow the community to share just stuff, really. That's kind of just the way to categorize it. It's just, other things. And then the last thing I have here is SaltConf. This is really one of the main things that I have been asked to do in the development organization is just to help gather content. And it's one of the things that's so exciting about working at Salt is a lot of times the technical writers are completely separated from the people writing the code. And so when I came into SaltStack, I looked at the open desks and I found the one closest to Tom's office. And like I can almost overhear him typing. It's just like, that's the kind of relationships that we want to build with the development team. And the community's been fantastic. The Salt developers are just extremely friendly. They tolerate my, questions, for the 10th time. And so I want to emphasize that there's a lot of opportunity here to just start gathering content. And then, as I said, I'd like to hear some other feedback. So get started. So I mentioned earlier, getting started is one of the areas of focus for us. I was talking with Dave Boucher, which some of you probably attended his sessions, and he was telling me, he's like, I went to a conference once, I think it was PyCon or some conference, and he had a 5-minute presentation. And he said, in that presentation, I set up, I took a bare metal machine, I set up a Salt master, a Salt minion, installed Salt Cloud, and spun up a VM in 5 minutes, in that. And I'm like, wow, I could probably do it in like half an hour or something. But the idea is, it's pretty simple to get an environment set up where you can just kick the tires. I've worked in some configuration management companies before, and it was like you have to have a full database, and like this wasn't just any database, it was a Microsoft SQL server set up, and you had to have a server installed. And like me as a writer, I couldn't even have the software I was documenting installed on my system. So with Salt, it's pretty amazing to just be able to have it sitting right there. It's like, you want to know how something works? Well, you've got it right in front of you. So let me flip over here, and I'm going to change tabs here. So this is another thing that we've been working on just as a presentation standpoint. So this is a kind of a getting started guide. This is the first one of a series that we kind of want to put together to get people just understanding the value of salt. And for this audience, you guys are definitely well beyond this, but for me, this is so essential to help evangelize salt. If you have to go to everybody and sit down with a whiteboard and be like, okay, here's the master, here's the minion, it sends data, and it's just like, if you have to walk them through every step, it just makes it difficult for you to drive adoption of salt in your company. What I would much rather see is you come in and say, yeah, we're using salt, we're getting all this value out of it. Go run through these tutorials. It takes 30 minutes. The file's right there on the site to download. And then let's talk next week about the solutions. Let's talk about the problems that I'm solving using salt. And then, they can come in with a little bit of a foundation of how it works. And hopefully they can get those moments through here where it's like, oh, I can see why you're using salt. And I think this is something that we can help drive. So just, this isn't anything, groundbreaking. You've seen it before. It's just a basic difficulty rating, time, simple presentation, a few coach marks along the way, video, that sort of thing, and then walk down, and then just, very clear flow. So next, and now you're executing commands. And so I'm really looking at it. This one, I think we're taking this through, like, what's that first set of steps? But we very quickly want to start making these more advanced, because once you understand the things like the reactor and, the event system, they really aren't that difficult. And that's what kind of amazes me as a non-technical person is I kind of understand some of the pieces of salt. And like I get up there and I sit in the reactor session and I see him start typing up the event listener, and I'm like, that makes logical sense to me. It's not this complex code. You don't have to do all these strange things. It's just, so I'm thinking, like, with this type of thing, we can really introduce salt to a lot of people. And just, for me, it helps you guys scale and become our evangelists. And I just can't stress how important it is, for me to just kind of help you guys get the word out, and recognizing that, the people in this room are essential. Okay, so did any of you guys attend the Enterprise GUI? Have you guys seen it? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide. What I want to do is just kind of pop over here. So for me, I've talked previously about helping you scale. And, I don't know if anybody in this room is thinking about the GUI or whatever, but for me, it's really just about scaling your knowledge. You work at a big company, you have a lot of servers. You don't need 20 guys on your team who can write salt reactors. You don't need a whole bunch of guys who can understand and debug the event system. It's like, what I'm looking at with the enterprise is I would imagine there's a lot of people who want to kind of push salt up to different levels of their organization. So one of the things that we're trying to do for enterprise is simplify salt. What enterprise gives us is it gives us clear workflows through the product, because it's kind of a defined path. This room's full of the cowboys, the people who go out and take the tools, put them together, figure out how to solve the problems, and that's a little more difficult to document than some of these clear workflows. And so that's one of the things where we're trying to make a set of help that's very task-based, it's very use case-based. And hopefully it's something that if you guys see value in, you can grab and turn your users loose on it, and you don't need to sit and walk them through clicking. So that's something else that we're working on. I'm excited about it. I like shiny buttons. I like clicking. I'm kind of a clicky guy. So I think it's great. So this next slide, I've got feedback written down, and what I would kind of like to do is just pull the whiteboard over and just open up the floor. Like I very much appreciate you guys taking the time, especially on the last day of the conference, to come in here and talk. What I would like to hear from you guys is just kind of what's working, what's not, and realizing that there's always things to fix in a fast-moving product, but it's just like, where do you hit the real roadblocks, and what can you tell me, start as I go in on Monday to start to tackle some of these things? Like, what do I need to be prepared for to make sure that we're making the right decisions? Anybody want to go first? Okay, right back here. Excellent.
So as I integrate and indoctrinate with my organization, the one question that is, what's the difference between a module and a state? Why would I use a module? Why would I use a state? And I think the documentation is really hard to figure out. I mean, obviously I know what it is, and probably everyone in this room does, but for a new user, especially when you say Chef, I encountered it this last month. Maybe in the documentation it's really clearly explain what this is for. Because I know
Okay.
there's definitely a merging between the remote execution and the configuration management. They're very intertwined.
Excellent.
Maybe more about all terminology definition.
Okay.
Just one place.
Okay. Excellent. Oh, yeah, certainly. Sorry about that. So the first question from the back was, some of the questions come up, what's the difference between a module and a state? And, we brought up everyone here, the people who know Salt understand these things. But new users can get tripped up on this. A glossary of terminology would be a very useful thing to have. And I'm personally a much more visual person than maybe some of you. And one of the things that we'd like to do is just present it in different ways for different people, so we can have some architecture that is text heavy, maybe shows some event debugging, but also just show up some graphics, like this is what your architecture looks like. This is the role of what the minion does. This is what the pillar does. This is what a module is. This is what a state, and just kind of present that stuff in different ways. So let's just rotate around the room this way. Go ahead, Dan. Okay. Excellent. So the question, the recommendation was architecture flows. And so I do kind of feel fortunate about the time that I'm coming into Salt is having SaltConf right now as I'm getting started. Just because a lot of the content that's presented here, I've completely planned to grab and get into the documentation as soon as possible. So event flow, I don't know if you attended Mike Place's session. He did yeah, okay, excellent. And the diagrams was the other. Okay, rolling back here, green shirt. Okay, setting up so the recommendation was a little more workflow guides, like setting up a lamp stack. Excellent, and then right behind him in the back corner. Okay. Interesting, okay. The recommendation was video transcripts. Right here, go ahead, LinkedIn shirt.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed that's a little bit of a pain point is no module application has parameters you can pass, but modules can execute module functions to return anything, right? Inside. And I find myself looking through the code to figure out what module to potentially return. So
okay. You caught that, right? Okay, so you remember what he said. I'm going to just put returns, module returns. Is that? Okay. Excellent, thank you. I'm rolling this way, right back here. Saltverte. Okay. I would like to know what that is as well. So, it's salt. Is it executable like that? Is that Saltverte? Okay, I think I've seen it in the doc, but okay, yes, and that's a great follow-up. So, Saltverte installation. Okay, let me step out of the way here. Anybody back here? Let's roll around here. Rick. Interesting. So like a doc to code linking off when it makes sense. That's a okay. Yeah, that's an excellent one. Right here on the front. It's, okay. Yeah, have you told me that earlier this week? Okay, yeah, I've heard that. So what he's talking about is a lot of times the module reference mirrors the conceptual. So like you come in and you land on the module, you're like, wait, I kind of want to know what this thing does before and the documentation is the same kind of in both places, or it's, there's not a good intro. Okay. Okay, yeah, and so that might come back to presenting some of this content in different ways. So in some of this you might want diagrams or something, but then you want strict reference. Eric, let's grab you and then we'll come right this way. Okay. Okay. So the recommendation was to use some sort of an automated process to add a version directive, or? Okay. Excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic. And that would be very beneficial for me as well. Let me grab Carl here, and then we'll come back over this way.
I was very confused how functions were or should be called. Just on this one page, it says all execution modules are the functions called a salt command, but functions are also our modules called our states.
Okay. Yeah, so just to clarify, do you think it's more of a process? You don't understand there's an overloaded terminology, because it sounds like... Okay. That's a great point. So the feedback was some of the terms are overloaded, like function, and it's in the context it would be helpful to kind of explain a little more of where these things are. Let me just capture this. All right, who? An overstate as well? Okay. Excellent. I've got that grabbed. Right here on the front, did you?
I'd like to see some more standardization about how to write your own custom modules. I've done that, but it's not really clear about how I should handle returns.
Okay. Let me just ask, how many of you will be willing to share like custom modules that you've written into like a GitHub. Like what I'm kind of thinking is like, and for me especially as someone who dabbles in technology, like I don't think that I write any code ever that I would want to be like, hey, this is the reference standard of how something should be done. But I have, you know, solved some problems. Like I do some JavaScripting, I do some things, and there's pieces. Did you have?
For the purpose of the documentation, it doesn't have to be awesome.
Yeah. And his point was, yeah, and his point was it just has to function. It just needs to be some way, and then you can iterate on it. But yeah, that's a great great point. Will you restate your point? I want to make sure that I captured. Okay, I was going to write examples, but can you clarify exactly?
Yeah, really the main thing for me was knowing what the return format needs to be for certain functions.
Okay. And you're thinking, yeah, and you're thinking if you just saw it in action somewhere and like had some piece of code, that would have been one way to learn it, or you could have read about it, or.
It varies from model to model.
Okay. All right. All right. Who else here? Right here on the front.
Two pieces. One is what maybe some recommended best practices for development of formulas or something what Seth was explaining. But so this is the best practices, how to organize your code, how to organize
Okay.
or something like that. So best practices is very difficult because from other places where people say, do whatever you want, they give you hundreds of choices and then you get lost. And I have a problem with explanation.
Yeah.
Essentially, that whole walk through how to write the recommended formula from
Okay.
that walk through the best practice.
All right. And are you thinking, and this, are you thinking of just directory structure, or are you thinking more of just in your code?
Maybe like more complex examples, but something here mentioned that not just one package installation, but the whole formula from scratch and why it's done and what it
Okay, that touches.
better and what we can do it this way, but this will be more readable and so on. This
Okay.
with comments on the not like step 1, step 2, step 3, but in the middle you can do this, but this
Yeah.
and that.
That's an interesting point. And one of the things that I run into, and you guys probably see it, is where it's like, this works today, but will it work if I implement the next feature? Like, am I sure this is done right? So some best practices.
Especially for community, it's a big point because if different styles go in, it's like style guide, coding style guide.
Okay. So and that you think that would make formulas more readable, more accessible, shareable. That's fantastic.
Second portion, just
Yeah.
like that's a Docker tutorial, sounds like an interactive tutorial. You do simulated terminal, and you type in. You don't interact with the server, but you have interactive tutorials. Say if you type this command, it will give you this output. If you do
Okay.
this, if you do this mistake or something, but this is like on Docker website that has.
We have to go take a look at that. Interesting. So you're saying it's on the Docker website, so like a simulated?
Simulated terminal tutorial. And has questions and say, give me guess what we have to do, and you say Docker something.
Yeah, that might be something I'll have to talk with Rain as doing some training for. That's something that he might be able to give us some input. Yeah, so who haven't we got to right here on the front?
You guys have done a great job of documenting the getting started process and getting your first minion going and getting master minions documented.
Okay.
But from there, getting to a more advanced state where you're managing a data center, there's a lot
Yeah.
of steps in between those, and there's no, it's like the getting started guide and then the product documentation. There's no getting
Okay.
bids.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Where does it fall off? Like how far do you kind of get before you kind of stop and say, okay, you know, is that like getting configuration management or getting remote execution or getting reactors implemented? Like, is there a kind of a place where you're like, yeah, it takes you really good to this spot, and then there's this like wasteland, and then I'm into the reference. Do you have any input there? Or?
In my experience, where I got to just using the getting started guide was having a server running and managing things, like, managing
Okay.
using states to manage.
Okay, interesting. So not so much Salt infrastructure, but just doing more with Salt. Did you have something to add to that?
So because I'm a EPA by trade, so
Okay. Yeah. What do you need to know right now to keep going? Okay. Fantastic. Excellent. They aren't there. Interesting. Who haven't we heard from? Anybody got something to say? We heard from you, but we'll hear from you again.
I had hard time to find the documentation for certification exam.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's
Out of hundreds, but this hundred is not found.
so you're meaning you want more of what's on there, the type of questions are on there, or?
Just list of questions because within 1 hour you answer like 80 questions, but if you put like 300 questions which you have to know, it's already helpful.
Okay.
And then you can expand on like preparation materials.
No, knowing
Presentations and all.
okay, and it's kind of knowing exactly what to study for that's fantastic feedback. Right here, Carl, is that right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's great feedback, and we actually have a page, and okay.
There's actually something we probably add to that page there. If you Google or use your search engine of choice to look for the words quick, restructured text, restructured text being one word, you'll find out near the top of the results a really
Okay.
good timer for creating links. And external links, like links to a creating links for a different
Okay.
page, roughly to a second for that page.
And
That's how I
yeah, and what I'll do is I'll take a look at that because it's probably something that I could help because I'm going through that same process right now, and I'm taking notes, and hopefully I'll be able to write it in a way that's a little, easier for people who don't write a ton of RST because it's the same thing for me. Yeah, in fact, I grabbed Seth the other day. I'm like, how do these links work? What's going on there? Like, I get the headings and RST and that sort of thing and indentation. Okay, anybody we haven't heard from? I want to give everybody a chance to speak up here. If not, then let's keep going. Anybody have something pressing that's not on the board here that has not had a chance? All right. So anything else? I mean, do we have this captured? One of the other things is like, what's priority-wise, like what is it that really is kind of preventing you from moving forward with Salt? Is it really, I've heard best practices come up several times here. The architecture flow is something that I've heard a lot of. Is it terminology? I mean, do you think that this is a pretty good list of things to take back?
This probably falls under the best practices heading, but what we get is a great way to do a million different things, but there's not really any steering in the right direction to do those things. And so, like, I would kind of suppose that falls under like the how and why we should be doing the things that we're doing. Speaking kind of back to the keynote of thinking like the masters rather than copying the masters, understanding the way that it's built and the way that it's supposed to be used.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Next one.
Documentation does a really good job of documenting all these various components of Salt, but there's so many, and you don't get a really good overall view of how to do something complex.
Okay.
Once you get to a more advanced point, you kind of starts being difficult to find documentation examples for things you're doing. It's like more advanced case studies on how to build a
Okay. And some of these are probably fairly common things, like the lamp example. I might imagine that's a pretty common deployment scenario, so that's something. Anything else? We got a couple minutes. We can talk. Oh, Rick.
You're a big metric guy.
Yes.
A lot of your work is metrics. What about a page that does a heat map of
Interesting. Yeah, exposing some of that information. So the one thing that I'll say back to that is, like, as I look at our metrics, I don't want to me, in some ways, that just shows us what's working well, not so much what we need to add. You know, so, you know, yeah, top links, this is kind of what's trending. Yeah. Yeah. It's a fantastic suggestion, though. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And one of the other things that I want to do is take a look at the search terms that are coming in, and then looking at what search terms are bouncing. You know, because so if someone comes into the table of contents and bounces, and it bounces like a single page, and then they close your site, we do it all the time. That's something where it's like, okay, they didn't see anything here that was compelling. So I think there is some behaviors there that we can look at and say, okay, these people are really not finding anything compelling here. Why aren't they? Is it, you know, do we need to do some search engine optimization? Do we need to do some different things? Quickly here. Okay. Fantastic. Excellent. So we're just 2 minutes over. It's lunch. I don't want to keep you guys here, get you at the back of the line. So let's shut this down, but I'm here all day. I love to talk about documentation. I just do. So find me after, grab me at lunch, and let's, anything I want to hear. I just want to make sure that we're going down the right path. The one takeaway, just, SaltStack's investing here. We know there's work to do, but we're making an investment, and we're excited. It's, there's a lot of cool things we can do. So thank you so much for coming to a doc session.